Mark was a billionaire, a man who had everything the world could offer, except an easy life for his son, Jake. Jake was born with a disability that made everyday tasks a struggle, but Mark had always taught him to be as independent as possible. That afternoon, Mark took Jake to a small, cozy diner in an attempt to have a simple meal together, away from the prying eyes of the high society world he belonged to. He wanted his son to experience normalcy, to feel like just another boy having lunch with his dad. As they settled into their seats, the waitress, a young woman named Sarah, approached with a warm smile and handed them menus. Mark thanked her politely, but before he could even look at his menu, his attention shifted to Jake. His son was trying to pick up his spoon, but his fingers trembled and he struggled to hold it properly. He frowned, his frustration evident as he tried again, only to drop it with a small clatter. Mark's heart ached, but he stayed silent, wanting to give Jake the chance to figure it out on his own. Sarah, who had been watching from a distance, immediately noticed the struggle. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should step in, but something in Jake's expression pushed her forward. She walked over and knelt beside him, making sure she was at his eye level. "Hey there," she said softly. "Would you like some help?" Jake hesitated, his eyes darting toward his father, who simply watched. Mark didn't say anything, letting Jake decide for himself. After a moment, the boy nodded shyly. Sarah smiled and gently picked up the spoon, placing it in his hand with a light touch. "You've got this," she encouraged, guiding his fingers around it just enough to help but not take over. Jake tried again, this time managing to scoop up a bite of food and bring it to his mouth without dropping it. A triumphant smile spread across his face. Mark observed the scene quietly, something stirring deep within him. Sarah's actions were not out of pity, nor did she make Jake feel different. She treated him with the same patience and kindness as she would any other child, giving him the dignity of trying. It was a rare thing, genuine compassion without expectation. He realized then that Sarah wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who carried a kindness that the world desperately needed. And in that moment, Mark knew that her small act of care would not go unnoticed. Mark sat in silence, watching as Sarah interacted with Jake. There was something profoundly different about her approach. She wasn't just being polite or doing her job as a waitress. She was fully present, treating Jake like any other kid, not someone defined by his disability. She didn't rush him, didn't sigh in frustration, didn't make him feel like a burden. Instead, she encouraged him, giving him space to try while being there just enough to support him when he needed it. Mark's mind drifted back to the early days of raising Jake. He remembered the judgmental stares, the hushed whispers when people thought he couldn't hear. He recalled the way some nannies and caregivers had treated Jake, with either excessive pity or quiet impatience. Few had ever seen his son the way he truly was, a boy with dreams, emotions, and the desire to do things on his own. Many people claimed to be kind, but kindness without understanding often did more harm than good. Sarah, however, was different. She hadn't hesitated to kneel beside Jake, to offer help without making it seem like charity. She had spoken to him with warmth, not condescension. Mark's chest tightened as he watched the way she smiled at his son, as if she had all the time in the world to help him enjoy his meal. It was such a simple moment, but to Mark, it meant everything. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his mind racing. He had met countless people in his life, powerful executives, politicians, celebrities, but very few had the kind of heart that Sarah had just displayed. Money could buy almost anything, but it couldn't buy genuine compassion. That was something that came from within. Mark wondered about Sarah's story. Who was she? What kind of life had she lived that made her so effortlessly kind? He had met many people who had been hardened by their struggles, who had learned to look out only for themselves. Yet here she was, a young waitress in a modest diner, taking time out of her busy shift to help a boy she didn't even know. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt something stir inside him, an urge to do something meaningful, something that went beyond his wealth and success. He didn't just want to leave a generous tip and walk away. No, this was different. He had seen something rare in Sarah, and he knew he couldn't ignore it. As Jake finished another bite, grinning proudly, Mark made up his mind. He would find out more about Sarah. He had the power to change lives, and this time he was determined to use it for someone who truly deserved it. As the meal came to an end, Mark knew he couldn't just walk away. He had seen countless acts of service in his life, people holding doors open, donating money, offering polite smiles. But what Sarah had done for Jake was different. It was rare, genuine, and came from a place of deep kindness. He had spent years watching people avoid his son, either out of discomfort or pity, but Sarah had done neither. Instead, she had treated Jake with patience and dignity, as if he were no different from any other child. Mark watched as Sarah moved from table to table, serving customers with the same warm smile, never once showing any sign of exhaustion or frustration. He could see the subtle tiredness in her eyes, the way she rubbed her wrist after carrying heavy trays. It was clear she worked hard, and yet she carried herself with grace, as if kindness was second nature to her. He had to know more about her. When she returned to clear their table, he looked up and asked, "Sarah, how long have you been working here?" She blinked in surprise, not expecting the question. "A little over 2 years," she said with a small shrug. "It's not a dream job, but it helps pay the bills." Mark nodded, sensing there was more to the story. "And what is the dream?" For the first time, Sarah hesitated. She glanced down, almost as if she was afraid to say it out loud. "I've always wanted to be a nurse," she admitted. "Ever since I was a kid. But nursing school is expensive, and right now I have more important things to take care of." Mark raised an eyebrow. "More important than your dreams?" Sarah let out a small laugh, but there was sadness in her voice. "My mom is sick. I work double shifts to help with her medical bills. Maybe one day I'll go back to school. But for now, this is where I need to be." Mark felt a wave of admiration and sadness wash over him. Here was a young woman full of potential, with a heart made for helping others, yet she was sacrificing her own future to care for someone she loved. It was the kind of selflessness he rarely saw in the world. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick stack of cash, placing it on the table as a tip. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, and she quickly shook her head. "Sir, this is way too much. I can't accept this." Mark smiled, pushing it toward her. "Consider it a thank you for treating my son like any other kid. Not many people do." Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the money, but before she could protest again, Mark leaned forward. "I don't just want to leave you a tip, Sarah. I want to change your life." She froze, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" Mark's voice was calm, but firm. "What if I told you I could make your dream come true? No strings attached. What if I told you that you could go to nursing school and never have to worry about the cost?" Sarah's breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest. "That's not possible," she whispered. Mark smiled knowingly. "It is when you're talking to a billionaire." Sarah's world seemed to stop. The clinking of dishes, the chatter of customers, the distant hum of the kitchen. It all faded into silence as she processed Mark's words. She searched his face, trying to find some sign that he was joking, but there was none. His expression was steady, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place, respect, sincerity, maybe even admiration. Her heart pounded in her chest. "You're serious?" she whispered. Mark nodded. "Completely." Sarah shook her head, a mix of emotions flooding through her. "But why? You don't even know me." Mark leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "I know enough. I know that you're the kind of person who helps without expecting anything in return. I know that my son isn't just another customer to you. You saw him, really saw him, and treated him with kindness when you didn't have to. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her apron, her mind racing. This had to be a dream. Things like this didn't just happen in real life. Struggling waitresses didn't just get life-changing offers from billionaires. I can't accept this, she finally said, her voice shaky. It's too much. Mark smiled, as if he had expected her answer. Why not? Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came. Why not? Because she had spent her whole life believing that good things weren't handed to people like her. Because she had always been the one giving, not receiving. Because the idea of someone helping her without expecting anything in return was so foreign, it felt impossible. My mom needs me, she finally said. I can't just walk away from my responsibilities. Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. I admire that, but Sarah, have you ever thought about what comes next? What happens when your mother gets better, or worse? His voice softened. You can't put your dreams on hold forever. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, because the truth was, she had thought about it. She had dreamed of something more, something bigger. But reality had a way of crushing dreams before they ever had a chance to take flight. I don't want to take something I haven't earned, she admitted. Mark leaned back, studying her for a moment before speaking. Then earn it. Accept my help, go to school, become the nurse you were meant to be, and one day, when you're in a position to help someone else, pay it forward. Sarah let out a shaky breath, wiping at her eyes. She wanted to say no, to refuse on principle. But deep down, she knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She had spent years sacrificing, giving, struggling. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to say yes. With a deep breath, she looked at Mark and nodded. Okay. A slow smile spread across Mark's face. Good choice. Sarah could barely process what had just happened. One moment, she was just another waitress in a small diner, working long hours to make ends meet. The next, a billionaire was offering her the chance to change her life forever. She had accepted. But even as the word okay left her lips, doubt and disbelief still lingered in her mind. Was this real? Could she really trust that someone like Mark would follow through on such an unbelievable promise? Mark saw the hesitation in her eyes and gave her a reassuring nod. I don't make empty promises, Sarah, he said. You're going to nursing school. That's final. His voice carried the same confidence and authority that had built his empire, yet it was filled with warmth and sincerity. Sarah felt her throat tighten as emotions overwhelmed her. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything, Mark replied. Just promise me one thing. Never let yourself believe you don't deserve this. Because you do. Jake, who had been quietly listening, suddenly grinned. You're going to be the best nurse ever, Sarah, he said excitedly. Sarah let out a small laugh, blinking away the tears that threatened to fall. I'll try my best, she said, ruffling Jake's hair. At that moment, the diner manager walked over, confusion evident on his face. Everything okay here? He asked, eyeing the thick stack of cash on the table. Sarah opened her mouth to explain, but Mark spoke first. More than okay. In fact, Sarah here just got a full-ride scholarship. The manager raised an eyebrow, looking between them. Wait. What? Sarah shook her head, still unable to believe it herself. It's a long story, she murmured. Mark stood up, pulling out a business card and placing it in Sarah's hand. Call this number tomorrow. My assistant will handle everything, your enrollment, your expenses, and whatever else you need. You're officially on your way to becoming a nurse. Sarah clutched the card tightly, as if afraid it would disappear. I won't waste this opportunity, she said, looking him straight in the eyes. Mark smiled. I know you won't. As he and Jake walked toward the door, Sarah stood frozen in place, watching them go. It was only when the bell above the door jingled that she snapped back to reality. She looked down at the business card again, reading Mark's name, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink in. For the first time in years, she felt something she had long forgotten, hope. And as she turned back to the diner, wiping her eyes and taking a deep breath, she knew that from this moment on, her life would never be the same again.